Ever seen karma work in real time? Watch what happens when a hotel refuses to serve the wrong man. The sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the grand entrance of Lexington Grand Hotel. The doorman barely glanced up. The valet, a young man in his 20s, hesitated before stepping forward. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, exited first and walked around to open the back door. Jonathan stepped out. Tall, confident, and dressed in an elegant navy suit, he carried the presence of a man who built his empire from the ground up. He adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored sleeves, glancing up at the gleaming chandeliers through the massive glass doors. The hotel was one of the most exclusive in the country, a place where power brokers and CEOs gathered. But as Jonathan took a step forward, he felt it. The stares. Not the kind that came with admiration. No, the kind that questioned his presence. The doorman's forced smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The hesitation, the shift in posture, the quiet discomfort. Jonathan had seen this before, too many times, but he ignored it. He had come for business. He wasn't here to make a point, at least, not yet. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and classical music drifted through the lobby. He walked with purpose toward the front desk, where a young woman with a stiff posture glanced up from her computer. For a moment she seemed taken aback, as if she couldn't place him. Then, with a rehearsed smile, she spoke. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" Jonathan pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter, the confirmation email clearly displayed. "Yes, I have a reservation. Presidential suite." Her eyes flickered toward the screen. A pause. Then, that smile faded. Something in her expression shifted, like a subtle alarm going off in her head. She glanced at her co-worker, a middle-aged man in a navy blazer, then back at Jonathan. A silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be an issue with your reservation," she said, fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" She exhaled lightly, glancing around as if searching for backup. "Unfortunately, the suite has already been given away. We're completely booked tonight." The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. Jonathan glanced over her shoulder at the digital screen displaying available rooms. The presidential suite was still listed as vacant. He knew the game. He had played it before, but he wasn't going to let it slide just yet. "That's strange," he said, tilting his head, "because your system says otherwise." The woman's face tightened, caught. But before she could respond, her colleague, the man in the blazer, stepped forward, his voice smooth but dripping with false authority. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service. I'm afraid we won't be able to accommodate you tonight." There it was, plain, blunt, no more pretending. Jonathan stood still. He took a slow breath, letting the words settle. The air in the lobby had shifted. Conversations at nearby seating areas had gone quiet. A few guests stole glances. He had two options: make a scene, or walk away with his dignity intact. Jonathan wasn't interested in putting on a show. He wasn't going to beg for what he already deserved. Instead, he smiled. A small, knowing smirk. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. His voice was calm, steady. "It's me. Move forward with the purchase." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the front doors. But this wasn't over. Outside the Lexington Grand, the air was thick with tension. Jonathan walked toward his car, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement, but his mind was already elsewhere. He wasn't angry, not in the way they expected him to be. He wasn't shocked. He'd seen this before. But what never ceased to amaze him was the audacity. A billionaire. A man who owned corporations, real estate, and businesses across the country. Yet, in that moment, none of it mattered to them. All they saw was someone who they believed didn't belong, but they had no idea who they had just dismissed. Inside the hotel, the front desk clerk let out a small, relieved breath as she watched him leave. "That could have gone worse," she muttered under her breath. Her co-worker, The man in the blazer gave a small chuckle. The arrogance was almost palpable. "Yeah, well, he got the message." They thought they had won, but just as Jonathan reached the passenger door of his Rolls-Royce, he stopped. A familiar voice called out behind him, "Sir, wait!" Jonathan turned his head slightly. A man in his mid-50s, white hair, dark brown suit, expensive watch, hurried out of the hotel. His expression was one of forced politeness. His name was Thomas Greer, the general manager. Greer wasn't smiling. His eyes darted between Jonathan and the car, realizing too late that he had made a mistake. I apologize for any confusion. Perhaps we can work something out." Jonathan slowly turned fully toward him, his expression unreadable. "Oh?" Greer hesitated, feeling the weight of Jonathan's gaze. The billionaire said nothing, just watched him. The older man shifted uncomfortably. We may have an opening after all. Let me double-check with my staff." Now, they wanted to backtrack. Jonathan let a beat pass before speaking. No need. He gave Greer one last look, then stepped into the back seat of his car without another word. The door closed, the tinted window separating them. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb, Greer stood frozen, watching the taillights disappear. Something told him this wasn't the end of it. And he was right. For most people, that kind of humiliation would have ruined their night. But Jonathan Carter wasn't most people. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the streets, the city lights casting flickering reflections on the tinted windows, he sat back, perfectly composed. His assistant, Malcolm, sat across from him, eyes sharp as ever. "It happened again, didn't it?" Malcolm asked. Jonathan exhaled slowly, watching the world move past the glass. "You already know the answer." Malcolm didn't ask how it made him feel. That was pointless. They both knew the game. What mattered now was what came next. Jonathan picked up his phone, scrolled through an email from his real estate team, and then looked up at Malcolm. "How fast can we move?" Malcolm didn't even blink. "Contracts are ready, just waiting on your green light." Jonathan let a small smile creep onto his face. "Then let's close the deal." The next few weeks were filled with silent, calculated moves. Jonathan didn't go to the press, didn't blast the hotel on social media, didn't waste his breath on outrage. Instead, he did what he did best. He let his money talk. His legal team finalized the acquisition of the Lexington Grand through a holding company. The previous owners, unaware of what had happened, had been looking to sell for months. A clean transaction. No drama, no headlines, just business. By the time the ink was dry, Jonathan Carter owned the very building where he had been denied service. And no one at the hotel had a clue. Not yet, but that was about to change. The day started like any other at the Lexington Grand. The morning rush had just begun, guests checking out, luggage carts rolling across the marble floors, business travelers sipping overpriced coffee. At the front desk, the same young woman who had denied Jonathan's reservation stood adjusting her tie, already exhausted. Then the email came in. She frowned at her screen. The subject line read, "Important. Ownership announcement. Staff meeting at 9 a.m. She clicked it open, reading quickly. New ownership. Staff meeting. Effective immediately. She barely had time to process it before her co-worker, the man in the navy blazer, leaned over. "What's that about?" She turned her monitor slightly. His face fell. But the real shock came 10 minutes later. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., the entire hotel staff, front desk, management, kitchen, housekeeping, gathered in the main ballroom, murmuring among themselves. At the front stood the executives, stiff as ever. But this time, there was someone new standing in the center. Jonathan Carter. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes scanning the room. Calm, composed, in complete control. A beat of silence. Then, whispers spread like wildfire. Recognition dawned on faces. Some turned pale, others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of what this meant. At the back of the room, Thomas Greer, the general manager who had tried to backtrack that night, was frozen in place. Jonathan let the murmurs linger, let the weight of the moment settle in. Then, in a clear, even tone, he spoke. "Good morning, everyone." The room went silent. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself properly, since some of you have already met me." His gaze landed on the front desk staff. They looked away. "As of today, the Lexington Grand is under new ownership." A pause. "My ownership." The weight of those words hit differently. Jonathan let the moment sink in before continuing. "I believe in hospitality, real hospitality, the kind where every guest is treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are, what they look like, or where they come from." Silence. Jonathan took a step forward, eyes sweeping across the room. "I also believe in second chances." A flicker of hope in some faces. But then, "However, some of you will not be staying." Tension shot through the air. Jonathan didn't need to name names. They knew who they were. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a new leadership structure. Anyone who cannot uphold the values of fairness, professionalism, and true hospitality, this is your notice." Then he turned slightly. His assistant Malcolm stepped forward, handing envelopes to key employees. Greer took his before even opening it. His face was already drained of color. Jonathan's voice remained smooth, measured. "For those who stay, there will be changes, real ones. Diversity training, strict accountability, and a leadership team that actually reflects the people who walk through these doors." Some employees exchanged nervous glances. Others nodded in silent approval. Jonathan glanced around one last time. "This is not just about business. It's about standards. And from now on, those standards will be met." Then, just as smoothly as he arrived, he turned and walked away. And just like that, the balance had shifted. The meeting ended in a thick, unspoken tension. Some employees hurried out, avoiding eye contact. Others whispered among themselves, still processing what had just happened. At the front desk, the young woman who had denied Jonathan's reservation sat stiffly, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. She hadn't been handed an envelope. Yet. But she could feel the weight of her mistake suffocating her. Her co-worker, the man in the navy blazer, wasn't so lucky. His hands trembled as he held his termination letter, his face stuck between anger and disbelief. He turned to Thomas Greer, the general manager, whose usual arrogance had drained away. Greer had already packed his things. He knew this was coming. "This is ridiculous," the man muttered, his voice shaking. "What, he just walks in here and decides who stays and who goes?" Greer let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "No. He decided that the night we threw him out." Silence. Then the front desk phone rang. The young woman flinched before answering in her most professional voice. "Thank you for calling Lexington Grand. How can I assist you?" A pause. Then her expression shifted. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Right away." She slowly placed the phone back down, her face pale. The navy blazer guy frowned. "What?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Carter just booked the presidential suite." A silence. Then the reality hit. The same man they had rejected, humiliated, and dismissed had just reserved the most expensive suite in the hotel. And now, they would be the ones serving him. That evening, the Lexington Grand had never felt so different. The energy had shifted. The staff walked with a new sense of awareness, careful with their words, their expressions. Because now they knew. The wrong person could walk in at any moment, and that person could own everything. Upstairs in the penthouse suite, Jonathan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking over the city skyline. Malcolm poured himself a drink from the minibar, shaking his head. "You didn't have to book the suite, you know." Jonathan smirked, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Oh, I did." Malcolm chuckled. "Just to make a point?" Jonathan turned, placing his glass down. "No. To remind them that power isn't about who they think you are. It's about what you build, and what you choose to do with it." A beat of silence. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single email. A donation in the name of Lexington Grand to a non-profit focused on mentorship and career development for marginalized communities, because power was best wielded with wisdom, and sometimes the best revenge was success. The next morning, as Jonathan stepped out of the Lexington Grand, the sun was just beginning to rise. The air was crisp, the city slowly waking up. He walked through the lobby with ease, no tension in his shoulders, no second glances from staff. Because now they knew exactly who he was. The same doorman who had barely acknowledged him before rushed to open the doors this time. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice respectful, maybe even a little nervous. Jonathan nodded once, stepping out onto the sidewalk where his Rolls-Royce awaited. As he slid into the back seat, Malcolm checked his phone and smirked. "The board is already talking about expanding the Grand brand. Looks like your little power move might turn into something much bigger." Jonathan leaned back against the leather seat, exhaling slowly. "It's not about power, Malcolm." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Then what is it about?" Jonathan's gaze drifted back toward the hotel, where employees bustled about, their energy different than before. "It's about reminding people that respect isn't optional." The car pulled away from the curb, blending into the city traffic. Jonathan Carter didn't need to gloat. He didn't need revenge. He had already won. Respect people, not because of what they have, but because of who they are. You never know when the person you dismiss today might be the one signing your paycheck tomorrow. So tell me, have you ever experienced a moment where life flipped the script on someone? Drop your story in the comments below. And remember, real power isn't just about what you own. It's about how you use it.